I'll try to get through this without breaking down. It's still kind of chilling to think about. Around the time I was 19, I was deployed to Iraq. My unit worked with bombs, and honestly, I didn't know if I would make it home intact. About halfway through my tour, the Red Cross notified my unit that my father was terminally ill. Within a week, I was placed on a plane back to the States. Now, my dad being ill was something I had grown used to. He was strong though, and I never expected to actually lose him. I lost my mother when I was 7, and my father's lungs had collapsed shortly before then. He was on oxygen and needed a wheelchair to go anywhere. Medications by the handful were needed every 2 hours. He gained weight from limited movement, developed diabetes, and had already beaten cancer once. I never expected to lose him, and he wasn't the type to ever give up. I arrive home, head to the hospital, and he assures me he's fine and they are overreacting. I visit him every day I'm there, but he tells me he'll be fine by the time I come home for good. I reluctantly go back overseas. I call his hospital every time I have a few minutes of free time and we're near a call center. My deployment finishes and he kept his promise. He comes home from the hospital because he says he doesn't want to end his life there. He gets worse and goes back. The family all visits, but we know he isn't improving. One day, I'm at home and the phone rings. It's an unknown number, so I don't answer. It goes to the answering machine and a very raspy voice mumbles, "Call the hospital, it's Dad." I grab the phone, but he already hung up. So I call. They tell me he's been intubated for the last couple of hours and he just started going into cardiac arrest. He's non-responsive and we need to come say our goodbyes. I argue that he just called me and she says that's not possible. They've been working on him for some time now. I hung up and told my family the news. My sister and I stared at the answering machine. We played the tape again and again. That was the last time I heard my father's voice. I'm a skeptic. I don't believe in the paranormal or ghosts, and I can't come up with any logical explanation. I still get watery-eyed thinking about it. This is my true story. It's a bit long, so bear with me. So most of the story takes place back when I was a little kid. I lived in a nice neighborhood in a relatively small town in Southern California. I had this person growing up. There's a reason that I don't call him a friend. I would see him everywhere, but the majority of the time that I saw him, it was in my house. The man was completely black, and no, I don't mean race. I mean actually full-on pitch black. His clothes were indiscernible. His face was hard to make any judgment calls about. The only distinct feature I remember were his red eyes. He had the most terrifying red eyes. The entire eye was red, not just the iris, by the way. It's weird writing about them now. I can see them in my mind. It gives me the chills. It would never be an auspicious moment when he arrived. It wasn't the clock striking noon or the second the sun went down. It would be random. I would be playing with my Lincoln logs, and without as much as a whisper, he'd be there with me. He would never do much, just stare and smile. Then he'd leave as quiet as he came. Longest he stayed with me was probably a little bit over an hour, just standing there, looking down. Anyway, as the years went by, I began to get accustomed to his presence. He'd appear, and usually I would just nod. I even got used to using the restroom around him. That's how often he was around, standing ever so close and ever so far away. The funny thing was, my entire family knew about him, and to this day still know. They never saw him themselves. My sister was the one who always believed me. My parents were slightly more skeptical, and it eventually became normal for them to hear about the black man in my room. I eventually stopped saying anything at all when he appeared. I tried everything, talking to him, yelling at him, asking him questions. One time, I even got the courage to touch him. He merely stepped away from my reach, so I left it at that. Occasionally, he would give me a smile. The reason I don't refer to him as evil, hateful, or whatever is because he never hurt me, never even tried, just watched and smiled. Those red eyes never stopped making me shiver, but that was mostly just me. We eventually moved out of that house. Childhood gone, I bid goodbye to the Shadow Man. He was there on the last day before the move. His grin that day seemed to be plastered on his face. It didn't waver for even a second. I was about 9 at this point. The next years of my life were blessedly free of his presence. No more watchful red eyes. No more crying myself to sleep. Speaking of sleep, I have in fact experienced sleep paralysis before, but the Shadow Man has never been a part of these experiences. Fast forward to age 16. I was walking up to my room. It was after midnight, and I hadn't thought about the black man in a long time. I was walking down the hall that leads to my room when the man emerged from my brother's room. His red eyes focused on me, and he flashed me a smile. He slowly walked across the hallway into my room. This is where most movie protagonists would chase the sucker down and ask some questions, or fight him. I did neither of those things. I turned around, walked back down the stairs, and left my house. I then sat on the curb until morning. I haven't seen him again since then. My sister still remembers him though. My parents remember hearing so much about him, but think it was just in my imagination. To be fair, I am a pretty imaginative person. I daydream a lot, but nothing ever physically manifests out of these daydreams. I understand why they're skeptical. When I was younger, I used to have horrible night terrors. Ones where I would wake up, but they were still going on and voices would yell at me saying they were going to end me. One night, I was sent to bed early because I did something stupid. I don't remember what. And then everyone went downstairs while I was supposed to be asleep. Of course, I was not going to sleep because I'm still wide awake listening to my parents downstairs talking about random stuff. Around 9:30 or 10 p.m., I start to feel really strange and feel like something is in the hallway, and it feels innocuous. I get a sudden urge to get up and go into the hallway to see what's there. My room is set up in a way in which I couldn't see the hallway from my bedroom because there was a wall that hid my closet and then my door. So I got out of bed, slid along the wall to my doorway, and looked down the hall to see what was out there. I will never forget what I saw. It was a lengthy, cloudy black figure with eyes that were semi-glowing red. It was crouched in a menacing manner with very long fingers. I was frozen to the spot. Locking eyes with this figure, I knew that it hated me with every ounce of its being. It started moving towards me like an ape. As it was moving towards me, I heard my parents start to come upstairs and the figure melted into the floor, but not before letting me know that it would find me later on. I bolted back into bed, crying a little from the shock and hatred I knew was placed on me by that figure. Fast forward to college, where I'm recounting this tale to a few friends of mine, and I decided to Google pictures to see if anything looked similar. It took us a long time, but eventually, I came across a photo of the figure I had encountered and nearly had a full-blown panic attack. They are known as shadow people, or shadow men. and they can be benign or extremely harmful. I still wonder to this day when I'll see it again, and if it will finish the job it meant to do nearly 10 years ago. This occurrence didn't happen to me, but to my grandmother. It would have taken place in the 1930s. My grandmother was a young teen at the time, and she lived with her mother and 5 siblings in an old house in the middle of the woods. The area was the Ozark Mountains in southern Missouri. My grandmother had gotten into a fight with her mother. She took off into the woods all day to get away from her for a while. When it got dark, she decided to come home. When she got home, the doors were locked and everyone was in bed. There was an old cot sitting on the outside of the house, and she decided to just sleep on the cot until morning. In the morning, when she woke up, there was some creature sitting on the end of the cot. It has been 15 years since I've heard this story, and she's only told me once, so my memory is a little fuzzy. I remember she said it was really ugly and had a full set of sharp teeth. It was shaped like a person, but didn't look like a person. She said that it just sat there and smiled at her with this abnormally large mouth of sharp teeth. When she started to get up from the cot to get away, it would start to get up and move toward her. When she would sit back down, it would sit back down. She sat there staring at it for a few seconds, and it continued to sit and smile at her. The creature was sitting between her and the front door. She finally jumped up and made a run for the back door. When she got to the back door, it was locked, but her mother was in the kitchen making biscuits. She was banging on the door, screaming to be let in, and her mother told her to go around front because her hands were covered in dough. My grandmother screamed she couldn't and was frantic enough that her mother ran to let her in. She told her mother what she saw. She had my grandmother's 2 brothers take the cot out to the woods, chop it up, and burn it. I used to work for my dad. He was partially self-employed doing regular maintenance and floor refinishing for a childcare program called Head Start. The one center was in an old school, which was built not long after the turn of the century. It served as a building for church functions in addition to housing Head Start and other childcare. He always did floors over the summer. Anyone who has stripped and waxed floors knows that when putting the coat back on, it's quiet and relaxing. We were the only people in the building since it was a midsummer weekend, and yet it felt off even before you enter, like someone was watching from the second floor windows. So here we are, making slow progress across this huge room when we hear something upstairs and stop. Then it sounds like someone was skipping across the room and back a few times and stopped again. We finished the layer and went upstairs. Nobody was up there, so we closed the doors and went back downstairs to start the other room. Once again, this sound started, but this time I sprinted up the stairs. The sound stopped before I reached the hall, but all the doors were open at various angles. We didn't hear any more sounds that summer, but my dad asked a childcare advisor from the other end of the building if they heard any weird noises. She said no, but the one day they were sitting down for snacks and a couple of kids were staring in the corner. The aide asked them what they were looking at, and one of the kids asked, "Why can't that girl eat with us?" The aide looked around, then asked, "What girl?" And the one kid points at the corner and says, "The little girl in the white dress." I literally have not set foot in that building since, and I have no desire to do so. I used to think ghosts were for scary movies, but I have trouble believing this isn't real. My dad used to work in a juvenile detention center in Miami in the early 70s. He said there was this one inmate that reminded him a lot of a young Hannibal Lecter. He wasn't strong, but he was smart and very persuasive. One day, he started a riot in his cell block just by talking the other inmates into it. My dad and another guard were sent in to check it out and try to calm things down. Everybody in the block was going crazy, banging on the bars, howling and yelling at each other. Everybody except young Hannibal Lecter. He was standing in the middle of his cell with his arms folded, smiling and muttering the same phrase over and over quietly. My dad tried to focus on what he was saying. After a couple of seconds, he understood. The inmate was reciting my dad's home phone number.